Greetings, everyone. Mario Blandini here with Tintri by DDN, and we're happy to bring you today a webcast on intelligent infrastructure and how you can optimize file sharing in distributed VM environments. Joining me today is Henry Baltazar, who's Research Vice President with 451 Research. How you doing today, Henry?
Doing great. Thanks for having me on today, Mario.
Awesome. Well, I'm the Chief Evangelist for Tintri by DDN, and you are possibly known by a lot of the folks on the audience today. Give us a quick background on yourself and what we're going to talk about.
Sure. My name is Henry Baltazar. I'm the Research Vice President in charge of our infrastructure and our applied infrastructure practice at 451. And my key role here is I lead what we call Voice of the Enterprise for the infrastructure. So in my research, what we do is we run quarterly surveys to get a better understanding of what's going on with end users. And we also do interviews with these end users to dive a little bit deeper. And that's a lot of what we'll be sharing in the research in terms of the webinar today.
Fantastic. And those who are in attendance are likely users of technology, and we want to share this information with you that will include a little bit at the end about offerings from Tintri by DDN as well. So kicking it off, Henry, take us through it.
Thanks a lot, Mario. So for today's agenda, it's going to be relatively short. I mean, the first part we're going to be talking about is what are the main storage pain points and challenges that we're hearing from the end users today. As many of you imagine, a lot of that's going to be about capacity and growth and budgets, and we'll be diving into those numbers and what we've been hearing from those end users. Another key question that customers are asking about is what's going on with software-defined storage, and how can we take advantage of that technology, both for the reduction of cost and for getting other benefits like scalability. Finally, the last section I'll be talking about is recommendations, just really to put a bow on everything and really center back to what are some of these issues and how we should be addressing them going forward. So going into the storage pain points and challenges, one of the top things we're seeing are that there's still a large portion of organizations, 43% in our last survey, that claim they're not ready for the future. In some cases, they're not even ready for their current requirements. So you had 10% of respondents who aren't ready for that. And some other organizations are resorting to doing over-provisioning to be able to meet their needs. Another key issue that makes problems worse is the fact that when we look at data growth appears to be accelerating based on the end users we've surveyed in the last couple of years. In the last 12 months, they've seen growth of about 20.7%. And going into the next 12, we're actually expecting to see a little bit of an increase from those end users, going close to 23.4% in the next 12 months. The other thing that's really important is basically every workload now is viewed as a critical workload. Even some quote-unquote non-critical workloads like test and dev, most organizations do not have any tolerance for long amounts of downtime, and they're also not willing to lose work. Even if it's a test dev environment, people don't want to lose hours and hours of work if something happens to the infrastructure. And this is an example of one of the interviews we had last quarter, which I thought really encapsulated some of the problems. Some of the key problems most organizations have are not just the technology, but also in the communication. Here, if you're looking at this quote, the main thing that stood out to me is the fact that even though the IT organization wanted to work with the business stakeholders and get a better decision making from them in terms of what data is important and what's not important, they're not getting the right type of feedback here. And what winds up being the response is that businesses resort to saying, everything's important, just keep everything. And the problem with that type of mentality, obviously, if you're an infrastructure professional, is the fact that we don't have infinite resources, and all the different data that we're trying to add and all these repositories that are growing, that's only going to make management and cost skyrocket. So circling back to the slide that we were talking about earlier, when we were talking about where organizations are in terms of their ability to deal with growth, we already have 8% of organizations that say that they're not meeting their current demands, and another 23% that are saying that right now their big issue is that while they might be doing things okay now, the near future is going to be very challenging for them. And when I start looking at that, I believe that that portion of the respondents is actually going to grow, because when we look ahead to some of the new workloads that are coming into play, whether it be IoT or maybe it's artificial intelligence, machine learning, or more analytics, all of those different workloads are going to fuel growth in terms of data and also create workload growth. So to me, I think the problems are going to get worse and worse for most organizations going forward, especially if they're trying to advance their technology agendas. One of the other things we ask about from the end users is, what are they seeing in terms of the VMs that they have to manage today? And what we find is, even the organizations that call themselves digital transformation leaders who are looking to create more agile environments, as they create these more agile environments, what we see is those organizations are have more ability to manage more VMs per admin, which is a great metric for looking at in terms of where we're at in terms of the efficiency scale. Another thing, the key thing that we also see is, the more organizations embrace automation and using and really integrating into that strategy, that's where you start seeing these IT professionals being able to manage much more data. So if we're looking at the bottom half of this chart, for example, when we're looking at organizations that already have a formal IT management strategy, those people are able to manage 123 VMs per admin, as opposed to, if you look at the bottom end of this with no automation strategy, on average, they're only able to do about 69%. So clearly there's a big difference in terms of automation and also where we are in terms of progression towards digital transformation and agility. Turning back to the storage side, not really a big surprise here, but the top pain point we continue to see, and top pain point that continues to get worse and worse, is data capacity and growth. But the thing is, when we start looking at that, it's not just about the growth part about it, it's also the fact that we need to do a much better job in terms of the resiliency elements, which is why I'm not surprised that meeting disaster recovery requirements was number 2 at 29% of respondents in terms of top pain points. But beyond that, we also need to figure out better ways of dealing with compliance and regulatory and governance requirements, and really getting a better understanding of what we have data-wise. I think that's really one of those key areas that are really going to force us to look at technologies like the ones we're going to be talking about today in terms of adding file services on top of virtualized environments. Because unless you know what the data is, unless you have a better means of manipulating it and accessing it, it's going to be really hard to meet these requirements, and also get to that fourth bullet point here, which is storage performance. Not only do we have to be able to access and identify data, we also need to be able to deliver that, and also do it at a lower cost. This is another slide that I liked in terms of the quotes that we heard from organizations recently. And here, this is clear. One of the key things we see is that the budget that organizations are getting for data storage are not keeping up to what's going on with the data growth. And because of that, we're seeing some organizations making bad decisions or difficult decisions in terms of deleting data or not retaining data that they probably could have had business value, extracted business value from. That's clearly a situation that most organizations want to avoid going forward. But it is given the speed of data growth and difficulty managing it, and we understand why there are sometimes or some occasions where organizations have to actually get rid of data too early. Looking a little bit at this is looking at the data growth slides that we talked about earlier, but in terms of the past 12 months, what we're seeing on average was organizations growing about 20.7%. And yeah, as I mentioned earlier, in the next 12 months is actually going to get worse. We're seeing organizations growing closer to 23.4% in the next 12 months. And depending on what type of vertical and depending on size of company, those metrics will fluctuate. But actually, I believe the trends are going to continue to go forward because we're just, most of the organizations we're talking about are creating data at a phenomenal rate these days. And just to tie the loop around the rest of this, as I mentioned earlier, while budgets are growing upwards in the 20% type range, in terms of annual storage budget growth, we're only seeing about an average of about 11% from the respondents. Large portion of the respondents, 51%, are only getting a 1 to 25% increase. And even in some cases, we're actually seeing 16% of organizations getting a 1 to 25% decrease. Normally we didn't see a lot of decreases in terms of storage budgets the last couple of years, but even that area is starting to grow a little bit, which should be a key issue and a key warning sign for many organizations that are out there today trying to deal with storage problems. Diving a little bit deeper into why the budgets are growing, why they're not growing. On the left-hand side, I think the thing that was most disappointing to me is, in terms of what was not surprising, overall business growth driving budgets up and storage upgrades and refreshes driving budgets up. Those weren't surprising to me, but what is a bit disappointing to me in the last 2 years, what we've seen is, in terms of budgets growing because to support new and expected projects, that's only about 27% or 28% from the previous year. That to me is a bit disappointing because that shows that we're still in the phase where the storage spend is more towards keeping the lights on when we should really be using this storage resource and storage budgets to advance the business and also to create more innovation to improve data access and data retention for organizations. When we look at the reasons why budgets decreasing, the top reason this time around was organizations looking to figure out ways to move some of that spending to public cloud. But the other thing we'll point out here is the fact that by making these investments in technology, by taking advantage of newer platforms that have key capabilities such as deduplication and compression and those type of elements, and also taking advantage of storage conversions, those are also key ways that we can figure out to be able to get more bang for the buck out of the budget and be able to get allow us to spend less on the storage because we're getting higher values. As far as other areas where we're looking at is, because we are clearly seeing that capacity is growing at a rapid rate and budgets are not growing. One of the other things that we're seeing from the vendor side and from the end user side is, well, what are the things we could bundle into these resources to make sure that we're getting higher value? One of the top things we've seen in the last couple of years, and something's resonated, is the fact that more and more organizations want to see their backup and disaster recovery capabilities bundled in with their infrastructure platforms. That's the user experience they want to be able to deliver. Today, it's not enough to just retain data and provide access to it. We need to make sure we have a strong level of data protection and recoverability. I think the other key areas we're going to be following quite closely as well is the fact that data management and archiving and that type of capability is another area where there's going to be an opportunity to do some consolidation and cost savings. Looking at down the list, I was surprised by the number of security types of technologies, whether it be DLP or data encryption, or even some of the antivirus and ransomware capabilities. When I start to see that, it's clear that beyond just storage management and data management, we also have to make sure that we're taking advantage of security partners and security capabilities when they're available. As I was talking about earlier, in terms of recoverability, the organizations need to have much more faster recoverability, even for non-critical data. If you're looking at the bottom part of the chart here, for a large portion, 47% of the response that we talked to there, if you're looking at the orange all the way up to before the dark blue, those organizations are basically saying that they need to have their recovery time objectives. They need to be able to recover their data in less than a day. And if you're looking at the bottom chart there, recovery point objective, that's the amount of data they're willing to lose. And based on what we're seeing in these charts, it's clear that the days of daily backup being enough are long gone. If you're looking at trying to meet these recovery guidelines, with daily backup, unfortunately, you're going to wind up losing a whole day of data on the recovery. And organizations are just not willing to do that going forward, even for test staff. The other aspect is they need to have faster recovery. So from a technology perspective, it's really going to be a shift away from daily backups to more of a snapshot type technology or any other type of technology which will provide us with a better means of faster recovery and better, more improved data granularity, so we're not losing data in the event of accidental deletion, corruption, or any other type of thing that might happen. Okay, in the final segment here, we're going to be focusing a bit more on software-defined storage before we go to recommendations. So one of the key questions we keep getting is it still going forward, is software-defined storage finally going to overtake appliances and become the dominant platform? And based on what we're seeing, even though software-defined storage is clearly becoming much more accepted, especially at larger organizations, we're still a ways to go. We're still a ways off in terms of appliances going away. We don't see that happening anytime soon. The other key element when we're looking at why organizations want to look at software-defined storage, it's usually because they see that some of these platforms, whether it be the object storage platforms or some of the virtualized storage platforms, they see a scalability advantage to using that type of technology there. And they also see a potential of doing cost reduction, especially in compared to the appliances that they've been buying for the last few decades. Another key thing that we're looking at is, in fact, on the negative side, though, is for SDS platforms, there are still customers that are really still concerned about maintenance, support, and reliability in terms of bringing down the quality of those types of products. Diving a little bit deep into those numbers, what surprised me is like on the small side, if you're looking at organizations that are 1 to about 1,000 employees, only about 90% of organizations we polled said that they had software-defined storage in use, though we do see a fairly large portion of them looking to do this within the next 2 years. Turning to the larger size companies, that jumps up, the in-use number jumps up to about 32% in that point. And the other thing that was surprising to us is when we looked at the really large companies, 10,000 or above, that usage rate jumps to beyond 40%. So clearly, when we're starting to look at the adoption today, it seems like adoption's been hindered a little bit on the lower end side with larger enterprises and larger organizations being able to take advantage of software-defined storage a little bit easier. Looking at some of the benefits there, the top benefit that organizations that have already deployed SDS are seeing are, one, they like the fact that they're able to get really good scalability out of it. 38% of respondents said that was one of the top reasons. Another group of organizations, the 31%, also said that they liked going to software-defined storage because it was part of their overall software-defined data center strategy, trying to move more of their resources to commodity as opposed to appliances, both in networking and servers and in storage areas. Another key element that they're seeing in terms of one of these big benefits that they have is potentially have lower acquisition costs compared to those storage appliances. And another thing that we're also seeing, and one of the key elements here in software-defined storage is integrations with cloud APIs and being able to use those capabilities to accelerate provisioning, which is really a key part about going into software-defined data centers and making these environments that are much more agile, so that organizations are making sure that they can deliver the resources to business stakeholders when they need to have them. Turning to the negative side, though, as I mentioned earlier, you still have 43% of organizations that are concerned with maintenance and support concerns regarding software-defined storage running on commodity hardware. As we also mentioned, there are reliability concerns there. By and large, even though a well-designed software-defined storage implementation on certified hardware will probably have just as much reliability and capabilities, we're still not at that point of acceptance for most IT organizations. A lot of IT organizations, even though appliances are not infallible, appliances can have issues. Appliances are just a more familiar way for organizations to purchase storage today, and we don't really see that changing too much soon because of a lot of these biases that we still see in the market today. One of the key things, though, to remember though is, right now, as I mentioned, while we have really great benefits in terms of scalability and potential reduced costs on the software-defined storage side, on the other side of it, the negative side, we definitely still have issues in terms of reliability. One of the things that organizations have talked to us about and really told us about is, hey, they're willing to do software-defined storage, but they need to know that, or would put their minds at ease, is quotes like this one, in terms of knowing that both the software-defined storage vendor and the hardware vendor, whether it be a server vendor or an HCI vendor or whatever vendor's running it underneath, they need to be working together, and they need to make sure that that the interoperability is in check, the manageability is in check, and that type of integration, that type of partnership is what allows them to have a much higher rate of trusting and understanding for using these types of technologies. With that, we're just going to go into the final recommendations. And to me, I think there's no getting around it. We as we mentioned, data growth is out of control. Budgets are not growing. We're going to need to figure out ways to consolidate stored resources to be able to drive multiple benefits. To me, it's not a matter of adding more silos. It's about trying to add more value to the things we have today. So if you already have a block level storage, it'd be nice to be able to have file layered on top of that, so you could be able to not only use those block resources, but also make the data that's stored within those repositories shared, which is really where we have to get to in terms of a lot of the next generation applications. Another key thing that we just mentioned was the fact that it's best when the software-defined storage and the hardware vendors can work together. While a lot of people understand and love the potential for using quote-unquote commodity x86 hardware to run these things, the unfortunate fact of the matter is, because of some of the complexity and because of some of the interoperability issues that still exist today, a lot of what we're going to rely on today is those partnerships to be able to make sure that whatever we wind up getting in terms of software-defined storage plus hardware will still yield a highly reliable and a very predictable environment, similar to what we get with appliances today. I think another key thing that we should have talked about more of, but I think is also going to be a key issue, is also ease of use and ease of management. a lot of organizations today, they're using much more generalists to be able to handle all these workloads. They may not have the money or the resources or the appetite to buy dedicated storage administrators, for example. And in those use cases, we need to make sure that the storage tools and the tools that they're using every day to create file shares and control access and other elements like that, they need to be integrated with tools that generalists need to know that currently used today, such as VMware's vCenter. Because if we have to continue to use multiple resources or multiple interfaces to be able to manage that workload, that's really going to add to the management burden and also force a lot of organizations to do more training and other expensive things to be able to keep up with the workload environments. And that's my last slide. I'm going to be kicking it over to Mario.
Hey, awesome, Henry. I appreciate the insights. I'm going to launch a quick poll for everybody here. We're asking you a fairly simple question about how you deliver your on-premises file services today. As we let that run, some comments on your presentation, Henry. We firmly believe the topic of this session is about virtualization, and Tintri by DDN's focused on virtualization. That's what our primary storage and infrastructure is for. And we've got the same feedback that it helps in test and dev, because having that abstraction flexibility allows you to do a lot of things that not only benefit production, but also that test and dev. And certainly flexibility helps respond to the business needs. So remembering back to the physical storage days, that's one of the biggest benefits that, that folks who have standardized on virtualization really can yield. And while it's been now a decade plus of people using it in their production environments, it remains one of the best benefits that are there. And heck, I love your advice on starting on a first step. It's actually the topic of today's discussion. And as I close that poll out, we'll share with you the results. And yes, network attached storage hardware and not consolidated with the primary storage tends to be the prevailing thing. And I love the fact that it's a virtual server, because that, to our point with software defined storage, a virtual server can run software defined storage and provide those benefits and allow for that consolidation and ease of management. So as I go on to my part of the presentation, I'll first introduce Tintri by DDN. We are a company designed for virtualization, and it's a technology that learns. We use the term intelligent infrastructure because while machine learning and AI are pretty common terms used to describe today's technologies, I'd like to say that Tintri was doing it before it was really cool. Understanding the actual data coming from virtual machines across the environment into the infrastructure and using that for automation and analytics. And the ability to do it on a VM level basis really provides a lot of benefit there. And powered by those, the learning that we do, we provide certainty with QoS and agility with snapshots, part of that data protection strategy that doesn't rely on the host, that doesn't have any CPU overhead and has instantaneous 1024 snapshots deep, the ability to really get as granular as you need to be to support your recovery point objectives. And I love that image that you showed a little bit earlier, Henry, around the VMs managed per admin. We found that in infrastructure, folks have folks that look after the infrastructure and folks that look after the VMs. And in a lot of cases, they're looking for ways to lower the burden on both. And with Tintri by DDN, you have both sides, the infrastructure folks and the folks managing VMs have access to these VM level actions to do things. We are, as an announcement that was made just yesterday, adding new choices for file access to our all-flash infrastructure. It has deduplication built in, as you might imagine. And the rest of our discussion is going to talk a little bit more about the Nexenta Store VSA for Tintri. But we invite you, if you have any questions for Henry, go ahead and jam those into the questions or the chat part of the webcast, and we'll look forward to answering those at the end. Let's talk about what was announced yesterday. The reason behind it is there is an opportunity for software-defined storage to be added into virtualized environments. And this really isn't something new. You could think of a Microsoft server, which has been historically the recommendation by VMware to provide file services, and that could always be mapped back to your primary storage infrastructure. In the case of Tintri, with those VM level actions and a lot of the great capabilities that we make ease of use possible with VMs and add value there. It makes a lot of sense. But now there are many choices for purpose-built VSAs, virtual storage appliances. So it's software-defined storage on virtual, which for the folks that we've talked to, they find the good fit workloads being those where you can eliminate another Windows server that you don't otherwise have to patch, manage, and operate differently than a lights out turnkey appliance. So things like home directories and departmental file sharing, or consolidating your branch office, remote office data is there. In the case of VDI, which is another great use case for Tintri infrastructure, there's the need for those user profiles, and that's typically done on a network attached storage hardware device, which was the number one poll response in what we asked. Those can be done with a virtual server, with software-defined storage, and take advantage of capacity that you have on the back end and get some of those management efficiencies that you're talking about in your presentation, Henry. So looking at the partnership, working better together, you'll see as we go to the next slide, the Nexenta Store VSA for Tintri. This is a technology that was released by Nexenta in the recent past, and what we've done as now members of the DDN family of brands. We're both now siblings, when before we were meet in the channel partners from a solutions perspective. We have designed this technology in collaboration between both engineering groups to pre-tune it to maximize the efficacy of deduplication and data reduction on the back end. As you folks may know, one of the cool things about software-defined storage is that you can do so many different things that your storage hardware might otherwise do for you in software, but there's an opportunity to take advantage of what the hardware already does very, very well. And in that case, we've taken this VSA, virtual storage appliance, from Nexenta. When deployed, it's a OVF, a simple a file implementation onto the infrastructure that you'd have, ESXi infrastructure, and it's managed using either the vCenter plugin or Nexenta Fusion, the management framework for the VSA itself. But we find that offering the choice between Flex or HTML5 in terms of vCenter plugins is one of the ways that folks can get that easier availability. One of the things I'll mention here is that from a feature perspective, a lot of folks might ask, hey, doesn't Tintri infrastructure provide NFS and SMB? Absolutely, but in the context of a very focused level of services specifically designed for running virtual machines. In the case of having a full-featured stack with all of the things like Active Directory integration and other capabilities that folks want to see from their file services, specifically a hardened SMB implementation that provides a better experience for Windows and Mac clients. The majority of what's out there for remote office, branch office, as well as your user profiles, user directories, departmental file sharing. So it is not a Samba implementation in this product. It's a designed and hardened, matured SMB server to provide a better experience there. And going over to the next slide, you'll see that we have a simple deployment wizard walking through how that works. It's fairly straightforward. The idea, Tintri has always had a design center around making it as simple as possible for virtualized environments so that you could spend less time thinking about how you have to configure the infrastructure and more time moving up the stack, working on your apps, which are what folks value most. Before I close up here, I'll make a couple of comments. The snapshots, naturally, as you build through, and you can see how easy it is to deploy via the OVF wizard. Snapshots in Tintri infrastructure are ultra easy to use, and we invite you, if you haven't had a chance to experience it before, or you haven't seen the latest capabilities that we have from Tintri by DDN available in our new TGC 4.1, making those things available at a higher level interface. So you don't have to go to the element manager to do these things, but rather do it from that shared interface. Similar to the way you wouldn't go to ESXi, you'd use vCenter to do those type of functions. It's something that we've helped out with there. And another point on security security, we have our Tintri OS 4.5, which recently added support for FIPS certification and is certified today for use with popular key managers from Vormetric and SafeNet, respectively, under the Talus family of brands. With that, we want to help you with all your use cases. So as we go to the last slide here, we'll look to have you check out more information on our offering. Some information is there. And after this webcast, for anyone who's registered, we'll be sending out the recording, some slides, and some additional information there. I invite you, if you have used Tintri before and you haven't seen the latest demonstrations, you can find us at VMworld next week, where we'll have all that on display, or you can go to our website, request a demo, and we'd be really happy to show you all of those latest things, as well as the links. So here, if you are a Tintri customer interested in evaluating this new technology, the Accenture Store VSA for Tintri, we'd invite you to let us know there, and we'd love to get back to you on that. So far, I don't see any questions or comments, but I do want to launch a poll while I ask Henry a couple of parting questions. You'll see here that while we go into the Q&A, if there's any way we can follow up with you today, we'd love to do that. A question for you, Henry, in terms of how infrastructure admins and VM admins, going back to that chart that you had around the number of VMs managed per administrator, is it something that takes into account what the infrastructure guys also have to do, or is that purely what the VMware guys need to do? Because naturally, there's moving parts on both ends, and as we go to more software-defined infrastructure, the idea is that all can be more automated.
Yeah, I think it's going to depend a lot on company size. So for example, if we're talking about a really, really large company, they're still going to have a lot of generalists. So your average Fortune 500 will still have storage administrators, they'll have dedicated security administrators and things like that. But even in those use cases, what we're finding is, because that storage workload, especially on the virtualization side, is so dynamic and so demanding, the storage admins can't keep up either. So what they wind up doing is they wind up carving out resources and providing some of the data protection, but more and more they're giving those resources to the VMware administrators to be able to administer and control that storage themselves, which is why when we talk about what you talked about today in terms of consolidation, that's why that's so powerful. The traditional way of us doing it would be just adding more appliances, adding more silos, but as we talked about today, that's really not sustainable. It's very, very hard to maintain all these multiple resources, and a lot of organizations want to have much stronger consolidation and much more dynamic environments. So, they're not sitting on over-provisioned resources. They're not sitting on unused capacity. So that's why I see this as really powerful, not only from a physical consolidation basis, but what we could do from a management side.
Sweet. And for us, a lot of our design center around working on solutions like this has been how we can partner amongst companies under the DDN brand, work together and provide that first step that takes manageability into account. Because at the end of the day, adding technology is always something that adds complexity. To the extent that we can do it with software defined that is part of everyday operations, it's even better. I have a question here, Henry, about the separation of data within role-based security models for compliance requirements, kind of a big question. I'll answer it more specifically around what the solution does, and then you can talk maybe a little bit about the customer feedback that you're hearing. The solution in terms of supporting the separation of data within role-based security models for compliance, in our case, is something from an infrastructure perspective that would be managed further up the stack. A lot of our users, based on a virtualized strategy, will provision the way their VMs work so that the places they're writing to and the apps that write to it will be separated and have their own logical isolation that way. As far as the way Tintri works, for those who may not be familiar, there's only one VM store. Sounds kind of crazy. It used to be that you'd have to provision lots of things from a storage perspective to get that granularity. We provide virtual lanes for each one of the flows of traffic that go from a virtual host down to the infrastructure, and all of that stuff is separated on the back end with the ability to see latency end to end from a server to the network to the storage infrastructure all the way through. So from in terms of isolating data, that's really something, Henry, that's like at a higher level, right? Because infrastructure typically does what it's told to do. There's a lot of planning that needs to go on in terms of how those things are isolated, at least at the application level.
Yeah, I agree with that, but I think the thing is we can't let infrastructure off the hook either, because I think if we're looking at one of the powers of going to a file store is, conventional file sharing also has access right capabilities and other security capabilities that can be tied in and used to help some of these things. Because I mean, at the end of the day, especially as we go to these heavily virtualized environments or private cloud environments or public cloud environments, as we're consolidating all those resources, there's no getting around it. We need to have both that intelligence to be able to find that data, but we also need to make sure that just because everybody's sitting on the same physical spindles or sitting on the same shared flash, that doesn't mean they should have access rights to all that. So I think that's where we can start pulling these things together in terms of, now that we've added, for example, an intelligent virtualized file share, let's make sure we're doing the security on top of that, because having that share is great, but it's also, that's not the full job. The full job is to make sure that not only you're creating access when needed, but you're also taking away access and making sure you're not losing data as well by giving too much access to that key capability.
You're right, and that's one of the things I'll point out about the Tintri, the Store VSA for Tintri, is that with Active Directory support and a robust storage model, the Store technology has been available in full software-defined storage, scale-out cluster mode, and has been optimized here to run as a virtual storage appliance. And from a provisioning and management perspective, whether you're using vCenter or the native tools, choosing where the data goes and how access is done there is the way it's done. And in a Tintri model on the back end, we provide the quality of service and separation there to enable that. Thanks for that. Another question here, actually, that looks like that wraps up our questions. Any last comments from you, Henry, as we close out today's session?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is going to continue to be a major problem for organizations going forward. Yeah, I think that consolidation is really going to be that key capability, and there's no getting around it. We just don't have money to keep throwing resources at. We need to be more intelligent with what we get out of the money we spend to get these resources. So I think with that in play, we're going to have to start looking at more and more ways to consolidate management and consolidation of these resources to make sure that we keep up with what's going on in these environments.
Thanks a lot, Henry. And on behalf of Tintri by DDN, I thank you for preparing this today and sharing some of the insights from the real world based on your research, working with customers. It's an area that we're continuing to invest in, and this first solution, the Store VSA for Tintri, is the first collaboration amongst members of the DDN family of brands, and you'll look to expect additional solutions with higher degrees of integration and higher degrees of capabilities available in the future. So we thank everybody for your attention and joining. As mentioned, we'll be sending out a follow-up communication with all those things, and I appreciate you letting us know how we can follow up with you. So we'll go ahead and get that done as well. Thanks again, Henry, and I hope you have an awesome day, and thank you everybody for participating.